Good morning, everybody. Welcome to everybody online as well. I hope are there anybody online? Okay, good. So welcome to everybody online. Good morning to you as well. The teens, I believe, with their parents are in Thames Valley, and the pre-teens are in the service today. So welcome, guys. Right, so we are in the series about men and women in the Bible and the divine harmony. And unlike last time when I spoke about Deborah and Barak, I thought I'm not going to allow Malcolm to spoil my sermon again by telling him what I'm preaching about. So in case you were reading the Watford Word, the answers are up there like last time. No, I'm just teasing. So these in the Watford Word, we're moving on towards Jesus and women. And Malcolm wrote up a really nice summary in the Watford Word about Jesus and women, what he was teaching about men and women, the significant women in the life of Jesus, some women who were following Jesus. Jesus referenced women as part of his teaching and in parables. Some women who encountered Jesus during his ministry. There's quite a long list of them. And we're going to look at one woman today and her interactions with Jesus. And her name is Martha. Now, if you hear Martha, 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 why twice? We'll see soon. If you hear Martha or Martha, Martha, what thoughts come to mind? If you're familiar with this woman in the New Testament, what thoughts come to mind? What do you think of? What do you know about? What do we know about Martha? What do we associate with her? Anybody?
Quite house proud.
House proud? You'd have to translate that to me. What does house proud mean?
She's concerned about, she wants everything to be right.
She wants everything to be right. Okay, yeah, everything must just be just right when she entertains people and have people into her house. Yes, Lizzie. You can identify, yeah.
Make sure that Jesus had a nice meal that was looked after.
Yeah. Yeah, you can identify with her. Yeah, that's very nice. Yes, kind of the liaison. She was unhappy with her sister. We'll soon see why. Yes, anybody else? She wanted Jesus' attention. Yeah, why? Why did she want his attention?
At the time she wanted, Jesus to concentrate. Maybe the food that she was preparing was more important than other things at that time.
Right, yeah, the food was more important than other things, and she wanted Jesus' attention. All right, it's quite interesting. I mean, some people talk about moaning Martha. They kind of associate that with she was complaining, she was a complaining one. Or I hope today that we can set the record straight, because in my studies and preparing for this, I realized, wow, it's interesting how we sometimes focus on one thing instead of really think about what we learn in the scriptures about this woman called Martha. Now, this name Martha is quite interesting. What's in a name? Martha, it could either be Hebrew, and in Hebrew, Martha is derived from the name Martha or Martha, which means bitter or sorrowful. So that's one view of Martha. Or it could be Aramaic, where Martha means the lady or the mistress, derived from the word Martha, which means mistress or lady of the house. So it's interesting, two quite contrasting. The one is bitter, sorrowful. The other one is kind of the lady of the house. A very nice name. Whether it's Hebrew or Aramaic, I don't know, but the two passages we're going to look at today actually contrasts those two things quite nicely. And I would like to believe that maybe the name was more Aramaic because Aramaic was the common language among the Jews of the day. Jesus mostly spoke Aramaic. And a lot of the people of the times, the Jews of the time, spoke Aramaic. So maybe it was the Aramaic rather than the Hebrew name. But anyway, what's in a name? If you want to know anything more about questions about nominative determinism, ask Malcolm or Leon. They seem to know something about it from last week's lesson. Or you can go and ask, what's his guy's name? Shakespeare. We said, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So let's not zoom in too much on what her name actually means or not, and look at what the scriptures say. We'll start in Luke chapter 10. If you want to take your Bibles out, you're welcome to follow along. I'll be reading from the New International Version, the NIV, with the UK English and spelling in it. This is the first interaction that we read about between Jesus and Martha. So it says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. I think if Jesus was British, you could probably hear him go, Martha, Martha, tut, tut, when he said that. And that's where the kind of the title comes from, and where the thinking about Martha comes from. She's the one that Jesus said to, Martha, Martha. And it seems that description has stuck. I can also relate to Martha. It seems like she had a lot of distractions and decision stress in her life. I get easily distracted and distracted by various things from what really matters. I allow myself to be distracted, and I have to really be passionate about something and really get into it for it to really grab my attention. So I can quite relate to her. I don't like having too many things around me and too many things to decide about. And what shall I focus on? Should it be this or should it be that? Like even going shopping. My wife likes going to places like Waitrose and M&S and Morrison's and Sainsbury's and other supermarket brands are available because you've got choice and you can browse and all the different kinds of breads they have. And I like going to Lidl or Aldi where there's only one of everything. You don't have to choose. The only choice is, do I want it or do I not want it? Do I need peanut butter? Yes. Okay. Smooth or crunchy? Smooth. Always smooth. Okay, that's it. You take the peanut butter, you go. Very simple. I get so distracted when I walk in and there's like, why are there 10 different kinds of peanut butter? I mean, it's not that complicated. And I would stand there for 10 minutes figuring out, why should I take this one and not that one? Anyway. If we think about and look at this passage, I like the pattern that Malcolm follows. He says, what can we learn about Martha, about the woman in the story? What can we learn about Jesus? And what can we learn about God? And we learn best when we learn in community. So let's talk about Martha. What do we learn and we see about Martha in this story? If we look a bit beyond and think about really what do we see here more than what we already shared in the beginning?
Since she's very hospitable, then nobody made her open her home.
Exactly, yeah, she was very hospitable and she was welcoming, and in a way she was an enabler for Jesus' ministry, because if she wasn't opening her home and providing food for people, because if there's food, people tend to come, especially if it's free. It's like, yeah, come for a meal. Yeah, sure. Just say when and where. She was an enabler who would allow people to come so that they could hear Jesus teach. And she was obviously very hospitable. Any other thoughts? Lisa?
I think the fact that she speaks up, she doesn't remain quiet, she's open with what is on her mind, what is bothering her.
Yeah, she had a really great relationship with Jesus, that she was able to tell him exactly how she felt. And even appealing to Jesus, can you talk to my sister? Maybe her relationship with her sister Mary wasn't that great. We don't know. But certainly her relationship with Jesus was good enough that she was able to tell him, this is how I feel, and could you help me with this? Any other thoughts? Go.
Well, the role of the woman in those days, they had to do what she did. They had to do the food for the men to just sit and wait, be waiting. So she was focused on the role that she had to do. So she was filling her role, and then, but the other thing is she could not understand why Mary wasn't. I don't think Mary was supposed to even sit at Jesus' feet.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe she was also supposed to be helping.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I don't know if,
Culturally, it was kind of it wasn't culturally the norm and acceptable. That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah. She was
She was serving. Yes. She had a servant heart. She had a heart that was willing to work hard and be concerned about, are the people taken care of. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about Martha? So interesting. She was worried and troubled. So, not by her own admission, but Jesus noticed that he could see through it. He could see that this was really bothering her, and she was worrying about it, and it troubled her. Which is why she appealed to Jesus. And she asked Jesus interesting questions. She says, "Don't you care that my sister has left me? Don't you care?" Now, there's some interesting lessons here for us, for ourselves, if we think about Martha. I was still thinking, reading through this, and I was thinking, yeah, in what way can I sometimes be like Martha? And maybe, we can ask ourselves that question. It's easy to say, Martha, she was a complainer, and she was this and that. But how can we sometimes be like Martha? Do we sometimes feel like asking God, don't you care? Don't you see what's happening? Don't you see the burden that I'm bearing? God, don't you see that I'm worried and troubled? Don't you care about me? We can sometimes be just like Martha, wondering if God cares, if we're struggling with something or going through tough times or some challenges. I think the other lesson I thought here is, I thought about, I can be distracted quite easily by all kinds of things. And I thought, what was Jesus' point here about her distraction? When he said, you're worried, you're upset about many things, in verse, where does it say? Verse 14, Martha was distracted by the preparations. So she was clearly distracted. I thought, what distracts me from the one thing that Jesus mentions? He says, Martha, you're distracted by so many things. I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. What distracts us from what really matters? The little things in life, whether it's worries, like Martha, or whether it's valid concerns, things that need to be taken care of, but that always come in the way of more important things. What do we think? What was the one thing that Jesus talks about when he told Martha, there's only one thing you need? He said a few things. To listen to him? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Listen. To be in his presence. So to listen to him, to be in his presence. Yes, David.
what comes to mind is and relating to life now. What about coming to God as we are? Not trying to perfect ourselves or try and be righteous. Just come as we are.
To come as we are. Yeah. Yeah. So the one thing is to not, I need to be perfect before I can come to Jesus. Yeah, good point. Yes.
To learn, because if she cooks, she knows already how to cook. She doesn't learn new things, but if she sits at the master's feet, she doesn't learn new things, learn the gospel, and know more about it.
That's a really good point. The wording here of Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, the way that's phrased and the way of speaking is of typically of a disciple of a rabbi. So Jesus was the rabbi, and someone who would sit at his feet would be a disciple of the rabbi. So Mary was acting like a disciple. So it would be to learn, to be a disciple of Jesus. So we can probably think of more things, but all these things is to follow Jesus, to learn from him, to be his disciple, to listen to him. All these things is contained in that one thing that Jesus said, you know what is really important? And then what is distracting us from that one thing? And it's easy to say, oh yeah, Martha, Martha. But when Jesus fed Stefan, just so distracted. You know what the most important thing is? Why do you allow all these other things to distract you from me and from spending time with me and from your mission and from your spiritual focus and your relationship with me? A thought for I think every one of us to think for ourselves. What is it that distracts us from Jesus? Jesus, in a way, calls Martha to a choice. He says, make a decision. And it's a simple decision. There's not a lot of choices. It's a bit like little or oldie, you know? You either choose, I want it or I don't want it. I want Jesus, or I want all the distractions of all the other supermarkets where there's 20 varieties. How can we change our choices to put away the distractions and choose the one thing that Jesus was talking about? So a few things are needed, or indeed only one. Don't worry and be upset about all the other many things, because there's never an end to those things. I've got a never-ending to-do list. I don't know if you are in the same position or you feel the same sometimes, but it seems like I could fill my day with my to-do list, and it just never ends. If you're not the same, I would appreciate any help. So if you're looking for something to fill up your time, come and have a chat. So that's some thoughts about Mary, Martha, and Jesus in this passage. Let's move on to John chapter 11. We don't know how much later, but this is some time later, and it's a fairly long passage. So we're going to split it up over a few screens, but I'm going to read the whole story, or most of the story, cut out the little bits where Jesus interacts with his disciples. And it's the story of Lazarus and the resurrection of Lazarus. Now, of course, Lazarus was the brother of Mary and Martha. So later on, we find this event. This is very close to the time when Jesus approaches Jerusalem for his crucifixion. And we pick it up in John 11 in verse 1. So it says, now a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is ill. When he heard this, Jesus said, this illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. That's verse 7. We're going to skip to verse 17. In between verses, there's some discussion between Jesus and his disciples about why go back, etc., etc. We pick it up in verse 17, when Jesus arrives in Bethany. So on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Verse 28. After Martha had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. It's quite a long story, but I noticed quite a shift here. So let's think about what do we learn about Martha, Jesus, God, and their interactions. And if you want to go back to any of the scriptures, just ask me and I can flick between the slides. But what do we see? Any thoughts? What do we see about Martha? What do we see? Do we see anything that's different from the previous passage?
Very committed to believing who Jesus is.
She's committed to believing who Jesus is. Yeah, she had great faith. Anybody else? Joe.
So her needs had to be met by being comforted by the people in the house, just like Mary.
Yeah.
However, she wasn't focused on that. She was rather focused not on her needs to be met by mourning, but by meeting Jesus. Whatever she wanted to do, however she wanted to interact with him, but she rather wanted to focus on him in her needs.
She wanted to focus on Jesus to meet her needs. Do we think she listened to what Jesus said to her the first time? Has something changed? Where would she have been the first time? Back at the house, serving people food and making sure everything is perfect and everything. Now she goes to Jesus. Where's Mary?
She's back at the house.
Mary is back at the house. Where Martha now goes first to Jesus. I thought, wow, this is quite a contrast. What happened to moaning Martha? What happened to serving Martha? What happened to Martha who was distracted by, all the people and taking care of their needs? She was the first. She went out. She wasn't even waiting at the house. Maybe she heard that people told her, oh, Jesus is coming, or maybe, she sent word to Jesus. Maybe she went out like the father of the prodigal son, looking out for his son. Maybe she went out on the road a few times every day. It's like, wonder, is he coming? Is he coming? I think that's quite a shift. Any other thoughts? What do we see? So I highlighted Martha in the passages here. So interesting, we see in So in verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. So that's the first thing that I noticed. She went out to meet him. Martha makes the great confession in verse 27. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who's coming to the world. What is the most important thing? Last time Jesus said, Martha, you know what? There's just one thing that's more important than anything else. What can be more important than that? That believing that Jesus is the Son of God, who is to come into the world. He's the Messiah. He was the promised one. And then going even beyond that, Martha believed in the resurrection. And she even confesses that.
Is this the first?
So,
Is this the first declaration of Jesus' messiahship in his followers?
oh, that is a good question. Is it the first one? It could be, because it's fairly early. Because Thomas came later. Thomas was in John 20. Peter was also later, I think. Good. That's a really good question. So Leon asks, for those online as well, Leon asked, is this the first confession and acknowledgement of Jesus as the Messiah? If it is, it's something significant which I overlooked, which is kind of, now I'd love to know, I'm going to look up the answer to this. I'm going to find it. We don't have time now. But if it is as significant as the fact that the first person to see Jesus alive was Mary, a woman. And if it is the first confession of Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God, well, John the Baptist, I guess, would have been the first one, but not among his disciples. That kind of, he was the prophet who told people, no, that's him, but nobody believed him. So I think of, except John, who was the prophet who was told by God himself, that this is him, and you need to spread the word. This may have been really good point. I'll go and find the answer. It will be significant if it is. It's significant anyway. It's definitely one of the early confessions. Right. Any other thoughts? Any other? What did I put in my notes here?
I kind of like the fact that there's still an element of that house proudness when they go to the tomb. It's like, no, it's going to smell.
Yeah. It's like everything must be clean and hygienic and neat and So can't have any smelly people walking around Jesus, It's he's the rabbi. Things must be ready and nice for him. That's a good point. What do we learn about Jesus? Oh, any other thoughts about Martha? Yes, Simon.
I've noticed one thing about this we haven't really seen before in this passage is that this is like Jesus' family. There's a lot of, Jesus loved Lazarus, they said it twice there. Jesus loved Martha, they said it twice there. This is very, very close to family, like family.
Yeah, so Jesus really loved this whole family. He loved Lazarus. He loved both Mary and Martha equally, even though they were very different. He loved them equally. Pardon?
He makes a big point of it.
He makes a big point of it. Yeah, he does. The other thing that's interesting, remember the first time Martha asked Jesus, don't you care? So here, when Jesus arrives, she doesn't directly say, don't you care? In verse 21, but she does say, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Again, it shows great faith. She already decided, you know what? He could have saved her. He could do a miracle. She already believed that if he was there, he could have saved him. Now, who this time says, don't you care? So what does Mary reach the place where Jesus was and saw him? She fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So Mary, in a way, also says, like in this time, oh, don't you care, Jesus? Don't you care about us? I thought you loved us. No, I thought you loved Lazarus. I thought you loved me. It always amazes me in verse 35 there. It says, Jesus wept. To the point where they said, see how Jesus loved him. And then when he goes to the tomb, again in verse 38, it says, Jesus once more deeply moved came to the tomb. Why would Jesus weep and be deeply moved if he knew that that Lazarus was going to be raised from the dead. I mean, I can understand crying over dead people. You know, we do cry. You know, we go to funerals. I go to other people's funerals that I cry. You know,
Maybe
people
he
that
hadn't asked the Lord to raise him.
maybe, but he knew. He said from the beginning it was going to be raised from the dead.
Yeah.
So he knew it. David? It shows his humanity, yeah? Okay.
Well, like, I've been to funerals before, where it wasn't necessarily that close to the person who passed away, but it's better than the church says. And I think early on, it says Jesus saw how this affair. I thought he was just really moved by the pain and suffering caused Mary and Martha. That moved his heart so much. He was so pained to see his close friends and family. I might feel like that. It moved him to tears. He was just pained by their suffering. I think that's why he went.
That's what I think as well. I think he wasn't crying about Lazarus who was dead. He was crying in empathy and sympathy with seeing the people's pain. You know, and the question that Mary and Martha asked, don't you care? It clearly showed he did care. He cared about their pain. He cared about their suffering. Jesus cares. He cares about our pain and our suffering. And whatever challenges we go through, he feels with us. Even though he knows whatever the better outcome will be, he still cares and he still feels with us. Any other thoughts? What do we learn about Jesus? I mean, there's a lot, but yes, Tunde.
I think it was interesting that Jesus was still very much in the same spot where Martha. The scripture was saying, he had not into the bed.
Right.
And for someone who has experienced the loss of someone that you really care about, when you feel that sort of message, it sometimes stops you looking at track. And it just goes to demonstrate potentially the bond that Jesus very much shares with that family, and he was still very much rooted in the same spot where he was when Martha shared that message. And at that point, you know, started to think of what would we do? What Mark said to him as well. And it also goes to show the relationship that God sometimes has with us in life. We sometimes feel like we might have forgotten this because he cared about it. But it's almost like Jesus being man and God together at the same time. It's providing that it's up to over and over again, thinking, how am I going to help this people? How is he going to help us? You know, he hasn't forgotten about this. And I think that's how I see this whole chapter that Jesus and Martha and his family.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of, I'm trying to think, how do I summarize that, especially for the people online who didn't hear the question. But in summary, so Jesus was stopped in his tracks almost before he arrived at the village, and he stayed there for a while as people came to him, and showed his connection and compassion with, his main mission wasn't to just go and get Lazarus out of the tomb. It was about the people being there and for them to see what happens, and for God to be glorified, rather than, it wasn't just about the event. So I think I missed a few things of what you said there, but in summary. What do we learn about God in this story? Any thoughts? I mean, who raised Lazarus from the dead? Was it Jesus? Or was it God, the Father? It was Jesus as God, but also, what did he do? He prayed. Even though he knew, he still prayed before raising him.
I if he needed strength, and because every time he does a miracle, he loses.
He needed strength.
Yes.
Yeah, he needed strength from God for the miracle. How do we apply some of this to ourselves today? I think it's amazing. One thing I thought about, it's amazing if we do choose, and I honestly believe, and I hope we can set the record straight on Martha today, that if we do choose to say, you know what, let's forget about all the distractions and choose the most important thing, she chose Jesus, that Jesus will work in our lives, like he worked in Martha's life. I think the most amazing thing is that God did a miracle here, of course, which is like amazing, raising someone from the dead. But we can easily say, oh, you know, that was back then in the time of Jesus. Question is, does God still do miracles today? And when we see them, are we like Mary and Martha that glorify God and that see the glory of God in that miracle? I was deeply moved and inspired. It was about a week or two ago. One of my best friends at university, he did the toast on the bride and the groom at my wedding, at our wedding. His name's Andre. We've been friends for forever. We spent many hours in the cafeteria playing hearts and sometimes studying together as well. One of my really good friends. But after finishing our studies, we actually worked together in Pretoria for about 3 years, and then he moved away, and then I moved away. But we're still in contact after so many years. I met his children only a few times over these years. I met his daughters when they were fairly young, about 4 or 5 years old, and then again when they're about 10 years old, 10 or 12 years old. And then again, quite interestingly, when we were in South Africa after my mum's funeral, when we were stuck there for COVID. And one of his daughters is called Janay. She has a stutter. And she's been stuttering ever since I can remember. When I saw her as a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, I think. When I saw her roughly around 10 or 11, she had a stutter. And it was quite a stutter where, you know, she couldn't say one sentence without a stutter in it. When 2 years ago, when we were in South Africa, we were staying in my dad's house, and it's quite amazing. There were these boxes in the garage marked with a surname, De Beer. I was like, oh, that's interesting. My university friend is called De Beer. And then one day someone showed up and said, oh, I've come to fetch my boxes. And Liesel was outside talking to her. And this was actually my brother's daughter's flatmate at uni. And Liesel brings her in and says, Stefan, can you remember who this is? And turns out this is Janay De Beer, my best friend's daughter, who by coincidence ended up in the same flat as my brother's daughter at uni. Anyway, by coincidence, God incidence, who knows? That's the last time I saw her. We had a conversation, still the stutter. 2 weeks ago, she posted a message on Facebook, a voice message, sharing her testimony. She said, I don't normally speak in public because I had a stutter, but as you can hear now, I want to share this with the whole world. A friend of mine, we were together, and she said, I'm going to pray for you. And a miracle happened. At that moment, my stutter disappeared. And now it's, 3 months ago or something like that? Do you remember these laws? Anyway, it's a few months ago. And she said, and my stutter is still gone. And she shares this whole testimony without a single stutter. And she says she hasn't stuttered for how many months it was, after a friend prayed for her. Now, in miracles, these miracles are not just in the times of Jesus. Now, this is not someone raised from the dead, but this is someone who's been to speech therapists and doctors, etc., her whole life. And then God did a miracle in her life. And she glorified God. And I saw through this that God cares. God still wants to do miracles in our lives. Because he wants to reveal his glory to us. And then will we acknowledge it when we see it? Let's wrap it up here very quickly in the last bit about Martha, in John 12, this is 6 days before the Passover, 6 days before Jesus goes to the cross, and we're going to have a communion after this. So this is Jesus on his way to the cross to be crucified. He stops in Bethany. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, where he lived and he died and lived, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. And who was serving the dinner? Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about half a liter of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, there's a whole lesson here about Jesus being the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one, and being anointed in high priesthood. Great lesson, great Bible study for another time. But there was something in this dinner and Martha serving that struck me. What do we think about this? Is it the same? Did she just revert back to the past, or is it different here? What do we think? Liesel?
Well, the dinner is in Jesus' honor, and I guess that Martha pulling that all together. So I think she's come all the way, she's rounded, she's complete.
She's rounded, she's complete. The serving and the food and the dinner, it wasn't really the issue. You can still do that. And Martha she still had that. Jesus didn't say, stop being a servant. Stop being so serving, Martha. You're serving too much. Don't be a servant. Jesus was a servant leader. That was not the point. And sometimes we miss the point. When we read that first story and we think, oh yeah, it's about the serving, she's doing all the hard work and Mary's doing nothing. That was not the point. The point was her heart and her priorities and her focus on Jesus. And I think, yes, it's mentioned here, but it's probably very different from that first time. And I hope that we can set the record straight. Next time we hear Martha, Martha, we can think not about the complaining Martha, Martha, but about Martha, Martha, the one who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God, who could do a miracle, show the glory of God by raising someone from the dead, so that she could confess that faith, be one of the first ones to acknowledge Jesus. So that she could be the one that goes first to see him and put him first in her life. As we have the communion now, let's think about that. Let's think about when Jesus said to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And it's a question to all of us. Do you believe this? Because when we have the communion, that's really what it's all about. Let's pray. Dear God, Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your incredible Son and his life on earth, his interactions with people, God, that we can learn from. Thank you that you and your Son Jesus cares about us. That you care about us to the point you were willing to sacrifice your own Son because you love us so much. Thank you, Jesus, that you care about us, that you were willing to give up your life. Father, as we have this bread that represents his body and the fruit of the vine that represents his blood, poured out for the forgiveness of our sins so that we can live eternally. We thank you for that, God. And we pray that you bless it in Jesus' name.